kick this off. So thank you for being here for Borderless. This is my 11th interview here at Malvern, although actually it's my 9th because 2 other people did 2 of them. And thank you to Malvern Books as usual for hosting, and I hope that you'll spend lots of time browsing after. Has anyone never been here before?
Yeah.
Go.
Did you say ever or never?
Never, sorry, never.
Oh, no.
Oh, okay. Well, this is a treat. Tell everybody about this bookstore. It's my favorite in the whole country. So this is Borderless, Conversations on Art, Action, and Justice. I started this series back in January of 2018 because I wanted to talk to artists about the power of words and the role of art in reflecting and changing our world. In this interview series, you hear from emerging and established writers about how and why they write and why it matters. This is a series about breaking down borders between people, between forms of expression, between identities and nations, between art and action, and you get to hear from writers and scholars about how to see the world and how to change the world. So tonight's guest is Oscar Cásares. Did I say your name correctly?
Pretty close, yeah.
Okay. That's it?
Yeah, Cásares.
Cásares is the author of, so Oscar is the author of Brownsville, a collection of stories that was an American Library Association notable book of 2004 and is now included in the curriculum at several American universities, and the novel Amigoland. He's the recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Copernicus Society of America, and the Texas Institute of Letters. A graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop, he teaches creative writing at the University of Texas in Austin, where he lives. And his new book is called Where We Come From. And Javier Zamora wrote in the New York Times, Cásares beautifully shows us that anyone can become part of a family, and that where you come from is nothing more than that, where you come from. It isn't where your story ends, only where it begins. Instead of being just a border novel or a novel about immigration writ large, it becomes more than that. It's a novel about the great lengths humans will go to in order to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. And I love this book, so I'm so happy to be here with Oscar, and so would you read to us a little bit?
Sure. I will. Let me give you a little, just sort of a preface if you're not familiar with the novel, the general story. It involves a retired school teacher in Brownsville, Texas, who had retired a bit earlier than she anticipated because she had to come home and take care of her mother, elderly mother. And so she spends all her time with this cranky older woman that raised her, and she's got this really combative relationship with her. And the only her only lifeline is her maid, who comes to clean the house once a week. And so this is this one particular day that changes their relationship and changes Nina, this retired school teacher's life, really, and it sort of sparks the beginning of this novel, and I think you'll get a sense of where it may be headed after that. Rumalda was not much of a talker, but Nina was just happy to see someone else's face, to see her smile or grimace when she shared some small detail about the last 7 days of being here with her mother. And perhaps this is how it would have continued if Nina hadn't been asking Romalda so many questions, inquiring about her husband and a younger daughter, and then the older one and her husband and her baby, instead of letting the woman sit and enjoy her coffee. At first, Romalda had claimed that no, everything was perfectly fine with their family, as always, gracias a Dios. Then a moment later, the story changed. She confessed that in truth, she had a small favor to ask. She had started cleaning houses not long after her second daughter was born. This second daughter was a grown woman now, but born with Down syndrome. She stayed locked inside a one-bedroom apartment while her parents came across to work. Nina had only seen dated pictures of Paloma, ones that made it seem as though she hadn't advanced beyond the age of 11 and still wore the pigtails like her mother's braided ponytail dangled past the middle of her back like the tongue of an old church bell, discolored with age and use. But the favor was for the other daughter, Naomi, the one married and with a 4-year-old. The husband had crossed and found work with a plumbing company in Fort Worth, and now, after more than 3 years of being separated, he was sending for them. The plan was for next Friday morning, Naomi and the little girl to walk across the bridge, pretending like they were only coming over to shop, and then wait on this side for a time when they could be taken from the border up north to Fort Worth. To do this, they needed a place to wait until someone could come for them. If La Senora would concede her this one favor and allow these guests at her house, Romalda promised they would be picked up as soon as possible. Waiting on this side would be safer than paying a coyote to pass them in the middle of the night, with the risk of getting across the river and then over or around the wall without being seen by the authorities. And imagine, with a 4-year-old. Even on this side of the river, they would still have to worry about how to get past the interior checkpoints that the Border Patrol had set up some 80 miles from the border, forcing many of the immigrants to walk through an untamed and merciless land where hundreds had died. But for that, Romalda's son-in-law had already knew someone to call, someone who could drive her daughter and the child hidden in a trailer to get through the checkpoints. She was asking Nina because of all the houses she cleaned, this was the only one where she could ask in confidence. La Senora wouldn't have to do anything other than allow her daughter and granddaughter to stay until the ride came for them. Before Nina could consider the question and how this would work, what type of people would be coming to her front door, Romalda suggested that they could stay in the little pink house, only for a night, 2 nights at the very most. Por favor, señora. Nina felt like she did when she used to drive across the shop and eat in Matamoros, back when it didn't feel like she was risking her life. And as she approached the bridge, the blind and maimed beggars would come to her with cupped hands, pleading just outside the car window. Only now it was happening at her kitchen table. This was the favor the woman wanted, for her to hide people behind her house. Not even her house, but her mother's. Her mother, who she had to remind practically every Friday to stop talking about los mojados when she knew the word was offensive, and more so because to her they were all mojados, rich or poor, legal or illegal, whether they floated across the river in an inner tube or drove over the bridge to bring their kids to the private school. And then for her maid to plan the entire mess before she even asked her. To have visitors, papers or no papers, was one thing. To hide them so they could be taken, smuggled, to say it more clearly, was something different. To Romalda, it was just a little favor. But who would land in trouble if someone reported them? The young woman and her little girl would be taken away, processed, transported back across the Matamoros where they had started. Nothing gained, nothing lost. And meanwhile, Nina locked up. Nina calling a lawyer. Nina with nobody to take care of her mother. Nina on the front page of the Brownsville Herald. But that's how it was with these people from across. For them, everything had a simple solution. If there was a problem, that could be fixed by whatever means, then there was nothing to worry about. They were the geniuses of the world when it came to finding another way. If it turned out the problem had no solution, no way of being mended or substituted with something else, no way of being glued or duct taped, then there was nothing to worry about either. Nemo, they said, and moved on. They never stopped to consider what would happen next, after the solved or unsolved problem brought a whole new set of problems. Then what? For that, they had no solutions. They came with so little, it was only ever about today, and tomorrow was tomorrow, another day to worry about when it arrived, if it arrived. Life, when one lived on this side of the river, was almost never that easy. But try explaining that to your cleaning woman. Thank you.
So Nina is the part of this novel, but the little pink house remains very important throughout the novel. And then Nina's godson, Orly, comes to
That's
visit.
where it gets all complicated.
So
Orland
then-
throws, her godson who's living in Houston and has a this sort of upper middle class life. Goes to a private school, lives in an affluent neighborhood, and he's told he's from the border, but he knows nothing of the border. I mean, his father's from the border, his aunts, his uncles, grandparents, everybody's from the border. He's visited, but he has no real attachment to it. And the circumstances of his life lead his father to bring him to the border for the summer. Nina wants him to come, but not exactly this summer.
At this time.
Exactly.
Right. So some people, it seems like with any novel that's about the border or about immigrants, somebody calls it timely. But I think I read that you were working on this for years, right? Like 10 years or something. I'd probably started working on it probably around, 2012, maybe even sooner. I had the idea actually, or an idea somewhere in this neighborhood, as far back as the late 90s. I didn't know what to do with it. Well, can you talk a little bit about what you were paying attention to or what you were obsessed with when you started the novel, and just a little bit about where this novel came from?
Yeah. I'll tell you, the contemporary part of it, I think from the outside, while it may seem like, wow, you've got something that's it's developing as you're writing about it, and there's something intriguing and dynamic about it happening on the front pages, wasn't the way it actually started. That actually came in kind of on the tail end. For me, I was intrigued by the idea of not the immigration that happens, or the crossing over that happens in a conventional way of immigrant coming from Mexico or Honduras or wherever and landing in the U.S. I was more interested in what happens. What is it? What is that experience like after they've arrived, after they've assimilated into the larger culture, which is what's happened to Orly's father, and by extension Orly, right? Orly's father grew up there, had all the values and wherewithal of having grown up on the border, and then moved to Houston and has made a different life for himself, right? How does a person who had that experience, how do they get back? Or do they ever get back? Can they ever get back? So I was more interested in that initially, knowing that this boy would be coming to spend the summer as my nephews and nieces had done when I was growing up, and watching them being completely disoriented and not understanding the language. Even if they knew Spanish, as Orly knows some Spanish, there's a different Spanish on the border. And so what you think you know, you don't actually know, because it's getting all sort of convoluted, mixed in with English, and it's not even, I wouldn't even call it Spanglish. It's another sort of form altogether. You know, what you're seeing is the proximity to the ocean, obviously the border itself, the degree of poverty, all these things were just, I think, shocking to them. And so I wanted to capture some of that, and so I knew that Orly was going to be coming down, and I knew there was going to be something that was just going to rock his world, and I didn't know what it was going to be yet. And I knew that Nina had something on that property that was just going to be utterly devastating to both of them. But devastating because she's his godmother, and takes this very seriously, and sees herself as sort of his guiding light and such, and she's hiding this thing from.
Is it a spoiler to say what it is?
No, I mean, I think it happens pretty early.
So right here in the inside.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, what essentially happens, it's not a spoiler, is that she does this one favor, thinking, you know, they'll come, they'll pick him up, they'll pick up the maid's daughter and granddaughter, and they'll leave. I will have done my favor, the little favor for them, and yeah. Well, the traffickers get there. They go behind the house. They see the little pink house. It's a formal rental property. They go, "This is pretty nice back here. Like, nobody can see it from the street. Maybe we'll come back again." And she said, "Well, it's not for rent." And he said, "Well, we didn't ask you if it was for rent. We just told you what's going to happen next." And then she can't get rid of them. And then that leads to them bringing what they call the loads of people, and it's out of her control. She had done the first favor, and mistakenly felt, you know, I guess, compromised in some way, and had accepted some money for it, and that you know, put her in the hole that much more. So right. So yeah, I don't think it's a major spoiler.
Yeah. So a boy gets left behind, right, or finds.
Yeah. Eventually, the you know, there's load after load after load, but one boy does come back.
I have a question about that.
Okay.
That's why I wanted to bring it up. But I mean, this actually leads me to this question about the nonfiction. You also write nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
You write short stories. But you wrote a piece for Texas Monthly, right, where I think the original title was Postcards from the Border. It's really beautiful if you haven't been able to see it yet, but it's like photographs along you traveled all along the border.
Yeah,
right?
from El Paso to Brownsville. Yeah.
And there are photographs and then postcards that you wrote to your daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the, I think this was from that piece, but these two paragraphs sort of stuck out to me. It says, basically there are two stories or two narratives of the border. One version tells us the border is a lawless land, a region in constant crisis, overrun with crime, unauthorized immigration, asylum camps, kids locked in cages, drug smuggling, cartel violence, armed militias. You know this story. In this telling, the border is the place where Texas ends and Mexico begins. The other version reveals a region that's home to parents and tios and abuelas, of comadres and primos, of people raising their families, of people enduring, of people falling in and out of love, of people dreaming their own dreams. This is the border of my youth. And I see the tension between these two narratives in both your fiction and your nonfiction. But how do you decide which form is best for telling the story that you want to tell? When do you, what makes it into fiction and what makes it into nonfiction? Is there a lot of overlap there? Is it
There's a
pretty
fair,
clear?
yeah, that's a great question. There is a fair amount of overlap, and one of the first things I've told my editor at Texas Monthly was that and I think he was just excited about the project, but I clearly, if I did, next time I'm going to have to record these conversations, but I said, I want to blur the line between fiction, or nonfiction and fiction, which a journalist does not want to hear. I mean, in hindsight, I don't know how I thought he said yes, and he says he didn't really say it. Anyway,
Well, what did you mean by that?
I meant that there was going to be a way that everything that I'm describing absolutely happened, but maybe didn't happen exactly the way that it wasn't going to be literal. It turns out that most of it is literal. I'm not going to say which part is not absolutely literal, but it happened. All right, it's not that it didn't happen. It's just that I'm seeing these experiences, and I'm bringing a narrative to the moment. So one of the cards, it becomes the sort of it's the principal image as you open the magazine and you look at the story. But we are in Presidio, out in West Texas, and we are going to cross over to Okinaga, the little town over. And Okinaga, as I think in most cases, is actually much bigger than Presidio. The towns on the corresponding side are usually much larger. Anyway, we're going to cross over, and the Border Patrol Customs now is stationed on the bridge, right? So no more stepping on American soil if you don't have everything you're supposed to have, right? So they stop you right at the international boundary. They're standing there. And then once you get onto American soil, assuming that you've got what they need you to have at that point, then you show your documents again at the traditional processing center. But they're there, and I think we stopped to talk to them very briefly, if I'm remembering correctly. And I looked over my shoulder down at the water, and I see some people in the river. And I look closer, and I mean, we're pretty high up, but they're not that far away. And it's this man, whom I'm assuming is the father, with 3 kids, and they're playing in the water as though it were a park, right? And the Border Patrol is looking at them. I mean, they're not like binoculars, but they're looking at them, right? And I describe, because this is what they're doing. I mean, they're pouring water on the dad's head. They're horsing around. He's trying to get away. They're pulling him down, and I describe him as being that they've got him prisoner. That they're playing with him, and he's trying to escape. And the more he tries to escape, the more they pull him into the water, and they're pouring water on him, and it's all fun and games and whatever. But then narratively, if it were a camera, it sort of pulls back and you realize that the Border Patrol also have their eye on it, the Customs also. But they're right smack in the middle of the river. I mean, right, it couldn't be any more central. And they're not, there's no attempt, there's no, they are in the middle, and they're just, and they've forgotten that there's either side of it, right? Now, that's me sort of imposing a narrative on a situation that was very real, but I've created something else around it, right? And so we did that in several occasions. It was a terrifying experience for me as a writer, because I kind of pitched the idea and then thought, oh my God, this is not going to work. What have I done? Because I knew there were going to be postcards. I sold it that way. But I thought, how am I going to get these stories? And they end up being, about the length of a postcard, a long postcard, but a postcard nonetheless. How do you tell a story in 200 words? And the essence of it, the idea is that I'm trying to tell my daughter, my 10-year-old daughter, this other version of the border. Something to counter the constant drumbeat of negativity that is in the news every day. If you hear something about the border, it has to be negative. So how can I show that resiliency? How can I show that people enduring, people laughing, people being themselves? Kids her age and what their experience is like. But on the other hand, I was telling somebody the other day, and I don't know if this is just like being blessed, and, stars. These stories just sort of happen. Like that story just happened. We didn't call a scout to say, can you have somebody right in the middle of the river when we cross? We cross over. We get right on the Mexican side. We've gone through the other processing station, and there's this girl walking this way, and I'm not absolutely sure, but she looks like a white girl. But she's carrying a mariachi outfit. And we struck up a conversation. We basically asked her how far downtown it is, because we're not sure if we're going to walk the whole distance. And she does turn out to be American. And so then, she tells us how far downtown, and then I ask her, what's up with the mariachi outfit? And she turns out to be the assistant band director in Presidio on the U.S. side, right? And she's going over to perform, but she lives in Ojinaga, right? And the reason she lives in Ojinaga is that 8 months earlier, she married a man from Monterrey or somewhere. He can't cross over. So they live in Mexico, and she commutes every morning to do her work at the school. And again, it's just like it was a story waiting to be told. It came to, and it happened over and over and over again.
It just seems like a place where the contradictions are so stark. So they're sort of concentrated there. Because you have these two sides of the border, you have the Border Patrol, you have all this history, and it's so it seems like these stories just sort of present themselves.
They do if you're conscious of that history. And you sort of, we get down to the Valley, South Texas, and it's citrus harvest season. And I make a few phone calls, people I know, and we get out to a melon farm. And we've been in that part of the border for, I don't know, 24, 36 hours. And it is clear that we are in the hive of Border Patrol. I mean, it's like everywhere you go, they're just like, you can't go 3 blocks without seeing some sign that there's a presence there. And you occasionally see in the wall or what have you, or the bridge or signs of the bridge, but they're very, very present. So we go out to this melon farm and filled with workers. Now, I didn't go around asking for documentation, but I grew up there. I sort of you can have a sense of whether somebody may be undocumented, and I had a good feel that some of them were. But they're working. This is a business. There is no Border Patrol out there. You're going to tell me the Border Patrol doesn't know where the melon fields are? You're going to tell me they don't know where the orchards are? They know where they are, but they look the other way. They just don't go there. Yeah, I mean these things where it's like, how is this okay, But yeah, it's everywhere.
Well, I wanted to ask you, there's something you do structurally in this book where you at times interrupt the narrative to go deeper into the backstory of someone who's just passing through the story, whether it's somebody who's delivering room service or I thought it was so interesting and so well handled, because I think it could have easily gone awry.
Yeah.
But I never felt like, I never felt like, okay, this story's being interrupted. Mm-hmm. And I was really fascinated by how that emerged. I thought it was really, really well done. And it was just like, just with a sleight of hand. So I was wondering where in the process you came up with that. And this will be my last question before I open it up to the audience.
It was something that I wanted to do from the very beginning, and the idea being essentially sort of a little bit of a counter to this whole notion of living in the shadows, which is again not true. We know, they may not be on the, being registered on the census and such, but they're not faceless. They're not. They're all around us, and they have their own lives and their own yearnings and their own disappointments and such. And so I wanted to find a way of having the main characters brushing up against these immigrants, and I think in almost every case being oblivious that they are so, at least oblivious to what the immigrant is dealing with, and so I knew I wanted to do that. I mean, I had seen a technique done actually in and it struck me because you mentioned an interruption. If you've ever seen the movie tu mamá también.
I was thinking about that. I was wondering if
Yeah.
that was an
And
inspiration.
that narrative intrusion. And of course, in that case, it is a sort of it's the same narrator, just going into different all the main characters' lives. But was there some way of having this sort of dual narrative going on? I mean, the initial draft had actually quite had fewer of them. I knew that the first one that I wrote, and it ended up being the first one in the collection. But as Orly is driving down to Brownsville with his father, you know, as you must enter the King Ranch, they're passing through the King Ranch, and in the distance they see the Border Patrol checkpoint. And they see they see an oil jack, and they see the barbed wire, and the cactus, everything you typically would see. But as they're going along, they see this plastic milk jug, formerly milk jug, just now a jug, tumbling along the edge of the road, and they just keep going. I mean, it's just trash. And so I mean, why would they think of otherwise? But the narrative at that point comes, sort of pulls back, and it tells you about the last person who held that water jug, which was a Guatemalan immigrant, an older woman who had crossed into the country, and then couldn't keep up with the group that she was traveling with, and got left behind. And that was, I mean, a fair amount of this had to do with the research that I had done, and that part, the western part of the King Ranch in Brooks County is just a graveyard. Hundreds of immigrants have died there, trying to evade the Border Patrol. So yeah, I mean that's basically where the idea came from, and wanting to again have them brushing up against each other unknowingly.
Well, I want to open it up to some questions from the audience. We have time for a few.
Oscar, I really enjoyed your book. That was great.
Thank you.
One of the things that I admired about it was how it really brings out just all the regular people in town at the border getting pulled into some bigger forces, sometimes coercively, sometimes willingly. But I wanted to hear more about how your research informed the narrative. You mentioned one example, but can you talk more about?
Yeah, I spent some time with the Border Patrol. I mean, I went down there, and they were in the middle of a program. I forget, they come up with these names as the military likes to come up with these catchphrases. So this is Operation whatever, and they had some name, but basically what it was when they found a stash house, if it was an abandoned place, and many of them were, they would demolish it. They would just come in and just wipe it off so that somebody else wouldn't go in and use the place. And so I went down, and that's what they were in the middle of, and the Border Patrol directed me to a couple of other places that had recently been busted, and they can only demolish them if if the owner has just fled and they legally seize the property. And in two other cases, they hadn't been able to. So the houses were still there. And one they sent me to was a middle class neighborhood. Drive through, there's pools or something, whatever, basketball net, whatever. I mean, just you drive through, you would not imagine that anything was going on. And then the other place he sent me to was a little ways off and influenced greatly the location for Nina's house and the Pink House. It was close enough to town, but still kind of on the edge, you know, heading out to the country. Anyway, the agent tells me this is how you find it. But when you go down that street, it's a one way, so you need to go in and then you need to make a U-turn. You need to get out. He says because they will have intel, and as soon as you drive onto their street, they're going to know you're there, and you don't want to stop, and you don't want to get off and take photos, and you don't want to walk around. And I got there, and I'm glad he told me. I wasn't going to take photos anyway, but I mean, it was very clear that you know, people were sort of looking out their windows, or you know, on their porches and what have you. The second bit of research was huge. Was I read an article in Texas Monthly about a guy who had written a memoir. He was a former INS agent, and his job for years had been to pose as an immigrant, go into Juarez, pose as an immigrant, find traffickers, find some coyotes to get him across, and then be transported all the way to Chicago. And he did this on, I don't know how many times, but, and once he gets to Chicago, bring the operation down. Right? Totally undercover, a time when there wasn't, you know, GPS or wires or anything, cell phones. What I had learned from talking to a fair amount of immigrants is that when they were going through the experience, they wanted to go through the experience and get from where they started to that loved one, and they wanted the experience to be over. They wanted to keep their heads down. They didn't want to be noticed, because to be noticed was to be a target. So, you know, the things they would tell me were kind of generalities of it was like this, and they kind of kept us this way. This guy, this agent, this INS agent, by virtue of his job and that he was having to build a case against these people, was documenting everything, right? So he knew how the money moved. He knew how long they were kept in certain locations, how they were transported, you know, and I would text him. I could probably text him right now. In 10 minutes, I would get a response. How was it done this way? Oh, he'd say, in 1981, I was in this bar talking to these traffickers, and this happened. You know, he'd want to just give me a probability. He'd give me the case where that thing happened. And so it was just like, I mean, I couldn't have, you know.
You had your own confidential informant.
Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Yeah.
Did you ever get the sense that the Border Patrol and other authorities there exaggerated exaggerated the dangers of the border on this side? You know, I'm just thinking, because yesterday I was reading the McAllen Monitor, and the Hidalgo County Sheriff is investigating the first murder of the year, you know, in Ghana, that had nothing to do with immigrants or anything. So, I mean, when I lived down there, it seemed like so, and it is statistically such a super safe place.
Yeah.
I guess what is there a deliberate, do people try to deliberately, the authorities, maybe deliberately try to exaggerate the dangers?
The danger on the U.S. side?
Yeah.
you know, I've got a friend who's doing a study and who's documented they call the spillover violence. You know, I mean, this is where it gets a little murky because, you know, there's the violence, if there is any, is usually cartel related, right? The cartels have a hand in the trafficking, but that's not their main thing. There have been situations, I know in Brownsville, where there was a case where you know, it was I think the lunch hour or whatever, and these guys pulled up to a restaurant, I think it was a little seafood place, and found their mark and pulled them out, dragged them out of the restaurant, and next thing you know, he was found in a field, not in good shape. It happens, but it is really rare, and I think those isolated incidents, and I think I mean they'll highlight those, you know, and those things will go everywhere, particularly in the more conservative media to back up that perception. Right? But no, I don't think it. I mean, you know, the thing is, you know, I think the rest of the country and even the state to some degree looks at the border region and hearing all these stories and you know, I mean, just logically would say, well, why are you living there? You know, it's so dangerous, there's so much. It's just crime infested, and it's this and it's that, and the drugs coming over, and whatever, and people down there are looking at Austin and Houston and Dallas and saying, why are you living over there? You know, that's a lot more dangerous than it is here, right? And you know, my family's been there since the mid-1800s. You know, I think we would have left a hell of a long time ago if it were really that dangerous. It's not any dangerous, more dangerous than any other place, and it's in many ways much safer. And you learn to navigate around some of that, you know, some of that unsavory stuff. You know where it is if you've lived down there long enough, and it's, you know, it's not a threat, you know, if you understand the landscape.
Well, I had a lot more questions for you, so we'll have to do this again sometime. I have one more question.
Okay.
Can you tell us what you're working on now?
Oh, God. I wish I could, because I'm really excited about the idea.
Okay. Is it a secret?
Well, it's just I'll just sort of give you I'll just speak in real frustrating, ambiguous ways that won't say anything. I'm interested, and this partly comes from the translation of the book. So I have a very serviceable Spanish, you know, but I would never presume to be able to translate the book. You know, they're educated in Spanish. So my Spanish is all kitchen Spanish, right? Barbecue Spanish, and so we sent the translation off to the translator who's actually from Tijuana, and he does the translation and sends it back to me. And then my job, though I didn't think it was going to be that involved, turns out that I have to translate his translation to the border. I've got to find a way to adapt his Spanish. And you know, and we're talking about, I mean, when we say this, the Spanish, it's not just going to be in Mexico, it's, you know, wherever there are Spanish speakers worldwide. So it's got to be able to travel. And I'm, you know, I mean, as any person of my generation who grew up in that region, or anywhere really, with Latino background, language is such a fraught issue. It's sort of the demarcation of how attached are you to your culture. You know, have you maintained it, retained it, or has it just slipped away? And as soon as you start speaking, somebody begins to correct you. And so it's just like, I know people that know a fair amount of Spanish, are much more fluent than I am, and will not speak it for fear that they'll be corrected or they'll make a mistake. And you're always, you know, it's hammered into you that there is the correct Spanish, and then there's that bastardized version that you people speak down on the border, right? And yet I'm writing a book about the border, and I'm having people speak, I'm giving these people voice. And to be genuine to that region, I've got to use those. And so I'm like, I must have lost a couple of years just how anxious and finally my editor is like, if that's how they say it, then damn it, it's la yarda, and that's what it is, you know. Let's not mince words, right? That's what they call it. And a whole slew of things, and things that I understood because I'd heard my whole life described as one thing, and I come to find out later that what we were calling it in Spanish is not what it is in English, and so then I've got to go back and change the English, right? Like, and then I'm thinking, I don't know either language. What I am practically illiterate in 2 languages that I'm writing. That this book is going to have my name on it, and I can't speak either one. I mean, but which led me to begin to think about language pretty intensely, and the idea that when you live on a border, when you live with these 2 languages, that you to this degree you live in this crevice between cultures and languages, and even thinking about it literally as the crevice of the gutter of the book, you know, and trying to bridge these 2 languages, and so that's all I'm going to say for now. Which is nothing, right? That's just like nothing. That's just like, what? He's writing a book about crevices and gutters. And what does that mean? I'm the only one that knows what it means. But I don't know. I'll say this. I'm super excited about it. I mean, I'm just like it's on my mind constantly. I mean, usually when I'm at the beginning of a project, it's no, I don't know. I'm pushing it aside. This is something I've been thinking about. It's something that I wrote actually in the probably 2001, 2002, something like this, and it felt like a piece that didn't fit with anything else. Recently, and so while I'm really excited about it, I'm terrified of it too, because I don't know that I'll be able to do it justice. But I'll also say that tells me that there's something there, you know, that terror of can I actually do this? Which I felt at times with this book. I definitely felt with the Texas Monthly piece. If there's not something at stake, I've come to learn that the payoff is not going to be quite there either.
So if you're a writer, go for the terror. When you see this project out in a few years, you'll be like, I heard him talk about that.
That's what it was.
All right, can you join me? And if you have other questions or things you want to say or get your book signed, actually, I don't know, maybe Oscar, if you want to go sit at the table or stay here. But,
Yeah.
thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here.